The bank manager's hands were shaking when he turned that security monitor toward me. I'm talking about Chester Boyd, who'd known me for 15 years, watched me deposit every paycheck from my contracting business. Never seen him rattle before. But there he was, pale as sheetrock, pointing at the screen like it might bite him. There on the monitor was my daughter-in-law Gloria, standing outside the safety deposit box room just 3 days after we buried my Dorothy. She had on those dark sunglasses she always wore when she was up to something, smiling at the front desk like she owned the place. But what made my blood run cold wasn't just seeing her there. It was seeing my own son Malcolm right beside her, holding a folder and looking around like he expected trouble. My name is Vernon Palmer. I'm 58 years old, and that was the day I learned that grief makes you vulnerable, but betrayal wakes you up real fast. Dorothy and I had been married 35 years when cancer took her. She fought hard for 8 months, and I thought the worst was over when we laid her to rest. I figured I'd spend some time in my workshop, maybe finish that cabinet set I'd been promising her, try to make sense of a world that suddenly felt too quiet. The house echoed different without her humming in the kitchen, without her calling out to ask if I wanted coffee while I worked in the garage. I never imagined I'd be sitting in Chester's office 3 days later, staring at proof that my own family was circling like vultures. Dorothy's funeral had been respectful, dignified. Malcolm gave a nice speech about what a wonderful mother and grandmother she'd been. Gloria stood beside him in her black dress, dabbing her eyes at appropriate moments, accepting condolences from neighbors who'd known Dorothy for decades. Looking back, I should have noticed how Gloria kept checking her watch during the service, how she whispered with Malcolm during the reception instead of talking with Dorothy's friends. But I was drowning in my own grief, trying to hold it together for the grandkids, trying to figure out how to live in a house that still smelled like Dorothy's lavender soap. "Mr. Palmer," Chester said, clearing his throat like he had gravel in it. "I didn't let them in. Your wife left very specific instructions. No one gets access without you present and proper documentation." He paused, studying my face like he was trying to gauge how much truth I could handle. Chester had seen me through good times and bad. He'd approved the loan for my first work truck, helped me refinance the house when interest rates dropped, even gave Dorothy advice about investment accounts when my business was doing well. But your son and his wife were pretty upset when I refused. They claimed you were having memory issues, said they needed to help manage your affairs. Memory issues. That stung more than I expected. I kept staring at that frozen image on the screen. Gloria had her hand on Malcolm's arm, the way she always did when she wanted to control the situation without looking controlling. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect little act she'd been running for 6 years since Malcolm brought her home from some real estate conference in Atlanta. She'd charmed Dorothy at first, called her Mom Palmer in that sweet voice, brought flowers to Sunday dinners, asked for cooking advice even though she never seemed to use it. Dorothy wanted to like her, wanted Malcolm to be happy, but she'd pulled me aside more than once with concerns. "Something's not quite right about that girl," Dorothy would say while we cleaned up after one of their visits. "She watches everything, remembers every detail about our finances, but she can't remember that Arthur's allergic to peanuts." I'd told Dorothy she was being too suspicious, that not everyone grew up the way we did, learning to fix things with their hands and value what they had. Maybe Gloria was just trying too hard to fit in. Maybe she came from money and didn't understand. Families like ours. Now I was wondering if Dorothy had been right all along. Malcolm looked nervous in that video, smaller than I remembered, even though he was 32 years old and should have learned to stand up straight by now. He'd always been soft, but Dorothy said that was just his nature, that not every man had to swing a hammer to be worth something. Maybe she was right. Maybe I should have listened better when he tried to tell me about his work, his struggles with the insurance business, his dreams of making it big in something that didn't involve getting his hands dirty. But watching him on that security footage, seeing how he kept looking to Gloria for cues about what to say, I realized my boy had lost more than just direction. He'd lost his backbone somewhere along the way. "Who else tried to get in?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Chester pulled out another form, this one with official letterhead and several signatures. They came back twice, actually. The second time, your daughter-in-law brought documents she claimed gave her authority over family finances. Our legal department rejected them, said they looked altered documents. My Dorothy hadn't even been in the ground a week, and they were already trying to forge papers. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, the same feeling I used to get on job sites when I could smell trouble coming. Sometimes you'd walk into a house that looked fine from the outside, but the moment you stepped inside, you knew the foundation was rotten. "Take me to the box," I said. Walking down that hallway, listening to my boots echo on the polished floor, I thought about the last real conversation I'd had with Dorothy. She'd been weak, but her mind was sharp as ever. We'd been sitting in our bedroom, her propped up against pillows I'd bought to make her more comfortable, watching the evening news when she suddenly muted the TV. "Vernon," she'd said, reaching for my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones, "I need you to promise me something." I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks, about funeral arrangements, about taking care of myself, about not letting grief turn me into one of those old men who stops shaving and eats cereal for dinner every night. But that wasn't what she wanted to talk about. If anything ever seems wrong with the family finances after I'm gone, you check that safety deposit box. I've been keeping some papers there, just in case. "Just in case of what?" I'd asked her. "Just in case people get greedy when they think no one's watching," she'd said. And the way she looked at me told me she wasn't talking about strangers. Dorothy always was smarter than me about people. I built things with my hands, figured if something was broken, you either fixed it or replaced it. She understood that some things rot from the inside, and by the time you see the damage, it's already spread too far. She'd grown up in a family where money brought out the worst in people, where her own brother had tried to cheat their mother out of the family farm when their father died. The safety deposit box was bigger than I expected, one of the large rectangular ones that cost extra but gave you room for documents and valuables. Inside were papers neatly organized in manila folders, a flash drive in a small plastic case, and 2 envelopes. One had my name written across the front in Dorothy's careful handwriting, the kind she used for important things like birthday cards and sympathy notes. But it was the second envelope that made my hands shake, written in red ink across the front. "If Malcolm or Gloria try to open this without Vernon, something is very wrong." I opened the envelope with my name first. Dorothy's letter was 3 pages long, written in that same careful script, and by the time I finished reading, I understood why Chester looked so nervous. My wife had been keeping track of things I never even knew were happening. Bank statements from accounts I didn't recognize, property records showing our home and garage listed as collateral. Copies of emails I'd never seen between Gloria and various financial companies. The total debt was $147,000. Not money we owed, money they owed, using our property as backings without ever telling us. The interest rates were astronomical, the kind that loan sharks charge when they knew they had desperate people by the throat. There were also payment schedules showing missed deadlines, penalty fees stacking up, and increasingly threatening language from collection agencies. But what really hit me was reading Dorothy's notes about the grandkids. Arthur and Eugene, my twin grandsons, 8 years old, with gap-toothed grins and an endless supply of questions about how everything worked. Gloria had been telling them that Grandpa Vernon was getting sick in his head and might have to go live somewhere with nurses who could take better care of him. She'd been preparing them for my disappearance from their lives, making it sound like a medical necessity instead of what it really was, a way to cut me off so she could steal their inheritance. Dorothy had written detailed notes about conversations she'd overheard when Gloria thought she was sleeping, plans to have me declared incompetent, discussions about selling the garage property to developers, estimates of how much the workshop equipment would bring at auction. They'd researched assisted living facilities, the expensive kind that would eat through a person's assets in 18 months, leaving just enough time for the life insurance money to cover the remaining fees. The flash drive had even more evidence. Audio recordings Dorothy had made using the small digital recorder I'd bought her for keeping track of doctor's appointments. She'd been recording conversations when Gloria came to visit, catching her coaching Malcolm on what to say to doctors about my supposed memory problems, discussing which lawyer they should hire to expedite the competency hearing. In one recording, I heard Gloria's voice clear as day. "The old man trusts me now. He thinks I'm just being helpful when I ask about the bank accounts and the insurance policies. Once Dorothy's gone, he'll be lost without her. That's when we make our move." I had to stop the recording there, went to the little sink in the corner of the room and splashed cold water on my face, trying to process what I'd just learned. This wasn't about Malcolm getting in over his head with debt. This wasn't about Gloria being pushy or entitled. This was a calculated plan to systematically strip me of everything Dorothy and I had built together. The letter ended with specific instructions. Call Ruth Davidson, our family lawyer. Don't let them know what you found until you're ready. Trust your instincts, Vernon. They're better than you think. Ruth had handled Dorothy's will, knew our family situation, understood how much the garage business meant to me. We'd used her services for 12 years, ever since we bought the commercial property and needed someone to help with the legal paperwork. She'd guided us through incorporating the business, setting up retirement accounts, even helped when we'd had that dispute with the city about zoning regulations. I gathered all the documents, slipped them back into their folders, and pocketed the flash drive. Chester was waiting outside the small room when I emerged, trying to look busy with paperwork, but clearly wondering what I'd found. "Everything in order, Mr. Palmer?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. "Chester, I'm going to need copies of any attempt to access this box. Official requests, documentation they brought, everything." He nodded slowly. "I can have that ready for you tomorrow morning." I drove home in my pickup, taking the long way through town, passing the diner where Dorothy and I used to have breakfast on Saturdays, the hardware store where I'd bought materials for countless projects, the school where Arthur and Eugene would start third grade in the fall. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it all through different eyes. This was what Dorothy had been trying to protect. Not just the money or the property, but the life we'd built, the legacy we wanted to leave for our grandchildren. I didn't go inside the house right away when I got home. Instead, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, looking at the place Dorothy and I had called home for 28 years. The front porch where we'd spent summer evenings watching the grandkids chase fireflies, the flower beds she'd tended with the same care I gave to precision cuts on a job site, the garage where I'd built my business from nothing into something that provided for our family. They wanted to take all of it. When I finally went inside, the silence hit me like a physical thing. No Dorothy humming while she folded laundry, no sound of her favorite cooking shows playing in the background. No gentle questions about my day or reminders. About doctor's appointments. Just the tick of the clock on the kitchen wall and the hum of the refrigerator. Sounds that had always been there, but never seemed so loud before. I walked through to my workshop in the attached garage. It's where I did my thinking, surrounded by tools I understood, projects that made sense. Half-finished cabinets lined one wall, hand tools organized on pegboards the way my father had taught me. The smell of sawdust and wood stain that had been my comfort for 30 years. I'd been installing a new security system before Dorothy got sick, cameras that recorded to a hard drive in my office, professional-grade equipment that Morris Foster had recommended when we'd talked about protecting the business from break-ins. I'd never finished hooking them all up, but now I had a different kind of break-in to worry about. That night, I called Ruth Davidson. She'd been our lawyer for 12 years, handled Dorothy's will, knew our family situation better than most. She lived alone now, her husband having passed 3 years ago, but she still kept office hours that would make younger lawyers jealous. When I told her what I'd found in Dorothy's safety deposit box, she was quiet for a long time. "Vernon," she said finally, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when delivering bad news. "Dorothy came to see me 2 weeks before she died. She suspected something like this might happen. We prepared some protections, but I was hoping we wouldn't need them." "What kind of protections?" Dorothy set up an irrevocable trust for Arthur and Eugene, completely separate from anything Malcolm or Gloria could touch. She also filed some preliminary documents with the state attorney general's office about suspected elder financial abuse. "Vernon, if what you found is accurate, they've committed serious felonies." Over the next week, I played the part of the grieving widower. Not hard to do, since that's exactly what I was. But while Gloria and Malcolm thought I was just puttering around the workshop, trying to stay busy with my grief, I was actually setting up those surveillance cameras, testing recording equipment, and making some careful phone calls to old friends from the construction business. You spend 30 years building houses and commercial projects in a town this size. You get to know people. Cops who work security on the side, insurance investigators, contractors who know how to find information when they need it. I reached out to Morris Foster, who'd run electrical on half my jobs before retiring from the police department 5 years ago. "Maurice," I said when he answered, "I need some advice about a family situation." When I told him what was happening, the line went quiet. Maurice had known Dorothy, had been to our house for barbecues, had watched Malcolm grow up from a kid who helped carry tools to a man who thought manual labor was beneath him. "Vernon," he said finally, and I could hear the anger building in his voice. "This is textbook elder abuse, financial exploitation. In this state, that's a Class C felony, especially when it involves forgery and conspiracy. You want my advice? Document everything, build a case that would make a prosecutor's mouth water, then nail them to the wall." So, that's what we did. Maurice came over the next day with equipment that made my security cameras look like toys. We installed audio pickups in the kitchen and living room, places where Gloria felt comfortable talking when she thought I couldn't hear properly. We set up motion-activated cameras in my office, disguised as decorative items Dorothy had left around the house. Then came the hardest part. I had to start pretending to be the confused old man Gloria wanted everyone to believe I was. Started acting forgetful during their visits, asking the same questions twice, mentioning how overwhelming all the financial paperwork seemed, without Dorothy to help me understand it. It worked better than I'd expected. Within 2 weeks, Gloria was talking openly about having me declared incompetent. She'd found a lawyer named Gerald Pike who specialized in elder care issues, someone who could expedite the process if the family was in agreement about the necessity. Malcolm went along with it, because that's what Malcolm did. He'd been following Gloria's lead for so long that I don't think he even questioned her anymore. When she said I was showing signs of dementia, he nodded and started pointing out times when I seemed confused or forgot things. When she suggested I might be safer in a managed care facility, he talked about how worried he was about me living alone in such a big house. The recordings we captured were damning. Gloria coaching Malcolm on what to say to doctors about my mental state. Detailed plans to sell the garage property to a development company she'd already contacted. Discussions about how much they could get for the workshop equipment if they sold it piece by piece instead of as a lot. But the conversation that really got to me happened on a Thursday afternoon when they thought I was napping in my chair. Gloria was in the kitchen, talking on her phone to someone who was obviously helping her plan the whole thing. "The old man's getting worse," she said, her voice carrying that fake concern she'd perfected. "Yesterday he asked me 3 times when Dorothy's birthday was. Malcolm's finally seeing that we can't wait much longer." There was a pause, then she continued. "The assisted living place in Millfield can take him next month. It's expensive, but that's the point. At $8,000 a month, his assets will be depleted in about 18 months, and then Medicaid takes over. By then, we'll have liquidated everything we need to liquidate." I sat in that chair, pretending to sleep, listening to her plan my disappearance from my own life like I was already dead. The moment that really broke my heart came 3 days later when I overheard Gloria talking to Arthur and Eugene. The boys had come over for their usual Saturday visit, bringing me drawings they had made at school and asking if I could help them build a birdhouse for their teacher. I'd set them up with small hammers and pre-cut wood pieces in the workshop when Gloria pulled them aside. "Boys," she said in that sweet voice she used when she wanted something, "Grandpa Vernon has been getting confused lately. Sometimes old people's brains get tired and they can't remember things properly anymore." Arthur, who was always the more serious of the twins, looked worried. "Is Grandpa sick like Grandma Dorothy was?" "Different kind of sick, honey. That's why Mommy and Daddy have been talking about finding a nice place where nurses can help take care of him. Somewhere with other older people who understand what he's going through." Eugene, bless his heart, piped up with, "But Grandpa isn't confused. He remembered my birthday and he's teaching us how to use the drill press." "Sometimes he seems normal," Gloria said, and I could hear her, getting frustrated that an 8-year-old wasn't buying her story, but other times he gets mixed up. It's not his fault, but it might not be safe for you boys to be here much longer. I had to leave the workshop then. Went out to my truck and sat there for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. She was poisoning my grandchildren against me, making them afraid that their grandfather was disappearing piece by piece, making them think it was kindness instead of theft. That night, I called Ruth Davidson and told her I was ready to spring the trap. The setup was simple. I called Malcolm and told him I'd been thinking about what Gloria had mentioned, about maybe needing help with my finances. I said I wanted to meet with their financial advisor, see if there were ways to simplify things so I wouldn't get so confused about bills and paperwork. Malcolm sounded relieved, probably figured the hard part was over. They arranged to bring Gerald Pike to my house 3 days later, along with some papers that would make everything easier for everyone involved. When they arrived, I was playing my part perfectly. Confused about dates, asking the same questions twice, mentioning how hard it was to keep track of everything without Dorothy there to help me. Gerald Pike was professional, sympathetic, exactly the kind of person you'd trust with your life savings if you didn't know better. He had papers ready for me to sign, power of attorney documents that would give Malcolm and Gloria complete authority over my accounts, medical directives that would let them make health decisions for me, even authorization to sell property if it became necessary for my care. The whole time we talked, they didn't know Maurice was in my workshop with professional recording equipment, capturing every word through the audio pickups we'd installed. They didn't know Ruth Davidson was in her office with a complete file on their loan schemes, ready to involve the authorities. They didn't know I'd already moved most of my liquid assets into the trust Dorothy had established. When Pike started explaining how the power of attorney would work, I asked some simple questions. How much debt was Malcolm really carrying? What exactly had they used as collateral? Were there any other financial obligations I should know about? Gloria jumped in fast, trying to keep Malcolm from giving direct answers. But I kept pressing, acting confused, asking them to explain things again because I wanted to make sure I understood. The more they talked, the deeper they dug themselves. Finally, I stood up slowly, like an old man who needed time to get his balance, and walked to my kitchen drawer, pulled out a thick folder with copies of everything from Dorothy's safety deposit box. You know, I said, setting the folder on the table with hands that weren't shaking anymore, I found some interesting papers in Dorothy's things yesterday. Maybe you can help me understand what they mean. The room went dead quiet. Gerald Pike looked at the bank statements showing accounts I wasn't supposed to know about and started packing his briefcase without a word. Gloria's face went white as the walls. Malcolm looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. That's when I stopped pretending to be confused, stood up straighter, looked each of them in the eye, and said, Dorothy knew, she knew everything, and now, so do I. I called Ruth Davidson then. She arrived 20 minutes later with Detective Winston from the county sheriff's office and a warrant for financial records that had been prepared weeks in advance. While they read Gloria and Malcolm their rights, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about Dorothy. Wondered if she could see this moment, if she knew that her careful planning had protected our family just like she'd hoped. The investigation took 6 weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt. Dorothy's documentation, combined with what we'd recorded, built an airtight case that even the most overworked prosecutor couldn't ignore. Gloria was charged with elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. The private loan companies were investigated too. Turned out they'd been targeting families with elderly property owners across 3 counties. Malcolm cooperated fully once he realized how deep Gloria had taken him. The prosecutor went easier on him because of it, but he still faced charges as an accessory. Their marriage didn't survive the criminal proceedings. Gloria moved back to Atlanta after posting bail, claiming she'd been the victim of a vindictive old man who couldn't accept that his son had grown up. The hardest part was rebuilding trust with Malcolm. We started having lunch once a week, just the 2 of us, no agenda except talking. He told me how Gloria had convinced him I didn't respect him, that I thought he was a failure because he chose office work over tools. Some of that was true. I had been disappointed when he decided construction wasn't good enough for him, but I'd never meant for him to feel worthless. 6 months after the arrests, Arthur and Eugene were back to their Saturday visits. They didn't understand all the legal complications, just knew that Mommy and Daddy were getting divorced, and that Grandpa Vernon seemed happier than he'd been since Grandma Dorothy died. We spent a Saturday afternoon working on that birdhouse project they'd started, 3 generations in the workshop together. When Malcolm stayed to help clean up after the boys left, he looked around at the tools and equipment that represented 30 years of my working life. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry I let her turn me against you. I'm sorry I almost cost the boys their grandfather." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight, had some gray showing at his temples, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. "Malcolm," I said, "being sorry is just the beginning. What matters now is what kind of man you choose to be going forward." A year later, I still miss Dorothy every single day. But I sleep better knowing she protected our family even after she was gone. The garage business is thriving. The boys are learning to use tools properly. And Malcolm is becoming the father they deserve. Sometimes people ask if I'm angry about what Gloria tried to do. The truth is, anger burns out after a while. What lasts is satisfaction. She thought she could manipulate an old contractor, figured I'd be too grief-stricken to fight back. She learned that underestimating a man who spent his life building things is a costly mistake. We don't just build houses and cabinets. We build cases. We build evidence. We build justice. And we always finish the job. Trust is earned through consistency, not words. And when family members start treating your love like a weakness to exploit, it's time to show them that wisdom and experience are far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's protecting what matters most, while teaching them that underestimating an old man's determination will cost them everything they thought they could steal.